Hello and welcome back, adventurers. This is Captain TTRPG, and today we're talking about Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Welcome back, adventurers. Today, we've got a video that comes to us via a comment I received. That's right, assuming I can go back and find that comment. There aren't that many, so I should be able to. I'll put it right here on screen. In any case, we're going to dive into the best weapons in the system, in my opinion anyway, because what else can it be that's not that kind of objective list? There are too many types of weapons to make just one list, so we are going to start by talking about the best melee weapons that rely on strength. What do I mean by that? Well, there are many melee weapons that have the finesse trait, which means that you can use dexterity rather than strength for your attack modifier, not damage, but attack. That'll be the next video. Instead, we are going to talk about weapons that hit really hard. They use your strength for attack, and because your strength also adds to damage, strength is strength and strength and strength. They either take two hands to wield, or you could dual wield them, use them with a shield, but in any case, they're relying on being those heavy-hitting weapons. The classes that get most out of strength-based weapons are classes like barbarians, and fighters, rangers, and champions, exemplars, even the magus, and some rogues, in fact. Near martials like inventors, thaumaturges, and investigators might also get value out of these depending on how you decided to build your character. So what are my criteria for a good weapon? Rather than a simple checklist, it's how the following play together. You've got damage dice, of course, because that plays into how much damage you're going to do. You've got your weapon trait, which in the system are huge and critical. You've got crit specialization for that weapon type, which I haven't really covered, but I will be talking about quite a bit about in this video. You've got number of hands required. That plays a role in how you can use it. And you've got category, which is simple, martial, or advanced weapons. With that in mind, as I go through, I'll explain why I chose them and why I might ignore something similar, even though it might sound just as good on first glance. Also, I know there are amazing uncommon weapons that I could have put on this list, but I'm going to stick with common weapons, so you know they will be allowed in your game. Finally, I'm only looking at weapons with a level 0 requirement. My list, in no particular order then, kicks off with the Greatpick. This is a huge martial two-handed pick with a D10 weapon damage dice. It's not the strongest in the game, but it's close. It's not a D12, but we're right up next to that. It has the fatal D12 trait. This means that on a crit, all damage die for the weapon become D12s, and you add an extra D12 that only happens after you do all of your damage doubling, which means on a crit, this is the highest damage weapon in the game, unless I badly missed something. Finally, the crit specialization for picks is adding an extra 2 damage per weapon damage dice, so just pumping up that already super high damage a little bit higher. This weapon isn't about versatility, it's not about control, it's not about being sneaky. This is your crit powerhouse single target damage weapon. Put it on a fighter focused on two-handed striking or a barbarian and just go to town. Next up is the Earthbreaker. It's a strong martial one-handed hammer with a D6 weapon die. Not the strongest. There are D8 weapons out there for one-handed options, but it's got some good traits, so stick with me here. First, it's got the shove trait, which on a one-handed weapon is great because if you're wielding a one-handed weapon, you probably have a shield or a second weapon alongside that. Or perhaps you want to hold a hand open to do grappling things. Well, normally you'd need a free hand if you wanted to shove, but this lets you shove with the weapon itself. It also has the versatile P trait on it, which means that it can do piercing damage along with bludgeoning damage. And that helps with damage variability because there are some creatures out there that are resistant to some of the basic damage types. It has raising, which is a bit of a throwaway. It'll help you do extra damage to walls, structures, objects, and things like that. So not the most important, but sometimes it'll come up. But the other trait that's really great here is it does have the two-handed D10 trait. So if you're done wielding your shield in one-handed, you just want to hit hard, switch it out, drop the shield, go with two hands, and just swing away. This gives you a lot of options in combat between the versatile and with the shove option and now going two hands. it's just so many options you can switch up easily without having to switch weapons and all that comes with that. This can be a great way to keep options open for yourself. The critical specialization for hammers is fantastic. It knocks a creature prone if they fail a fortitude save against your class DC, and prone is really scary for characters because one, they have to waste an action to stand up, and two, if you or any of your nearby allies has reactive strike, you're going to get a free swing when they try to stand up. So prone is a great thing to put on characters. Now you've got shove, you've got potential prones, all sorts of great things come with this weapon. This weapon is really, really about options. But if you want to drop the options and go just full on damage, you're not missing much here. Great option. Next up is the Guisarme. All right, I'm going to admit, I have no idea how to say that. And when looking it up, I didn't get great options. So somebody feel free to correct me in the comments. This is a long reach option for two-handed combat that still has a D10 damage die. There isn't a single non-magical D12 reach weapon in the game, so you're doing about as good as you can do. The reach trait is why you would take this, generally speaking, but it also has the trip trait. This lets you trip a creature from a distance using your weapon rather than a free hand, which also means if you have any potency runes on your weapon, you get to add those into your chance to trip. Knocking creatures prone is amazing. Knocking them prone from a distance so they have to get up and waste movement to get to you, wow, that is extremely effective. The only thing I don't love with the polearm crit specialization is that it's about repositioning a creature 5 feet. Now this is good, don't get me wrong. I'm never upset to be able to freely move creatures around. Unlike with clubs where you're simply pushing them back, this is much stronger because you just get to reposition them as you like within 5 feet. I just don't think it's as strong as something like knocking creatures prone that we see with other crit specializations, but it's still good. And if there's active effects from your teammates on the playing field right now, this could be extremely strong. So don't discount it, and yes, feel free to push creatures off of edges. This is a weapon for you if your goal is high damage, but you want to keep your distance. Or if you're a creature that can already keep their distance, like say a giant barbarian, and you want to just be silly about it and keep extreme distance. Some people also just like polearms. All right, next is the spear. This is the sole simple weapon on the list, but for good reason. It has a D6 damage die, which is still pretty good for one-handed weapons. Not amazing, but it's good with a shield. Good combo up there, just like we had with our other one-handed weapon. The reason I like it, and it stands atop the simple weapons for me, is it's got the thrown trait. In fact, the thrown 20 feet trait, which means it not only holds up in melee if they get up close and you've got your shield and you're one-handed, but in a pinch, it can be great against creatures you can't normally reach. Flying creatures come to mind. Another plus is that spear criticalization is it gives the creature the clumsy 1 until start of your next turn. That's your next turn. Okay, which means your allies are getting to take advantage of the fact that the creature is clumsy 1, reducing its AC and its reflex saves. This is a great way to set up your allies, especially if the creature can also be flanked, because clumsy is status, flanked is circumstance. All of a sudden the AC is dropping like crazy, and wow, you're really going to get a lot of mileage out of all of the hits against this creature. Don't underestimate the power of a basic weapon. And for those classes out there that actually give you feats where they upgrade the die size of a damage die on basic weapons, this becomes a D8 and is truly a fantastic one-handed weapon. All right, let's jump into the Meteor Hammer. You think, oh really, another hammer? Except it's not a hammer. Not really. Despite the name, it's actually in the flail group, and this is a two-handed martial flail that only has a D8 hit die. You might think, well, that's 2 steps down. We're really looking iffy now. Hold on. I know it's a low damage die, but there's good reason. The traits here are crazy. For starters, it has reach. So it's a flail with reach. Awesome. So now your D8's only 1 step down from the D10 reach weapons, which are the highest reach gets. So that doesn't make it feel quite as bad. Then it has trip, like we saw with our polearm, as well as disarm and backswing. So yes, you could trip your enemies, but you might be in a situation where you actually prefer to disarm them. Now, disarm used to be awful, but with the remaster, it actually got improved quite a bit. So look into that. And of course, I talk about it in my traits video. The visual alone almost makes it worth it, like potentially yanking something out of somebody's hand from a distance with your giant weapon. Then you have backswing, which is almost like getting agile on a non-finesse weapon, which is rare. Now, there are agile weapons, but there's usually lower damage die. It's not truly agile, right? Agile reduces your multiple attack penalty by 1 each step. This only reduces it by 1 if you missed. But in the cases where you are missing and you still want another swing at somebody, that +1 really does make a difference. Now you can trip and disarm with reach, but what's even better is action-free knocking prone. Yes, the critical specialization for flails is also knocking a creature prone, but instead of a fortitude save, it's a reflex save. And for big, bulky, hard-hitting monsters, they'll have a lot stronger fortitude save than they will reflex save, making this almost more likely to happen against enemies that you really, really don't want next to you in combat. You put all those together, and even with that D8 die, it still acts like an amazing weapon, and I still think you should consider it when looking at how best to take advantage of weapon traits in the system. All right, going way down here on damage die, but it's a fun one. The Spiked Gauntlet. The reason I went with a very different choice here is it's in the brawling weapon group. And yes, it only has a D4 damage die. Why even use something that low on damage? The traits are freehand, meaning you can treat the hand using this as a free hand for purposes of things like tripping and shoving and grappling and all of that. Also, it has the agile trait, normally just a finesse weapon thing, at least in most cases, but in this case, it's not a finesse weapon. This will help those strength characters out there looking for 2 to 3 attacks per round. Now, yes, with finesse weapons, you can still use strength. I'm not saying you can't, you can, but still, this is fun for somebody who's not even considering finesse weapons. Now, for what I really wanted, the crit specialization for brawling weapons. Brawling puts slowed 1 on a creature until the start of your next turn if they fail a fortitude save when you crit them. That's against your class DC, of course. Yes, the save hurts, but slowed 1 is so incredibly strong that I'm okay with it. In case you haven't watched my conditions video, slowed 1 means they're going to lose an action next turn. You've taken something away from them, and generally speaking, there's more players than enemies, at least when this will matter, so you're taking actions from the enemy team in a way that they can't recuperate. This may not be a high damage weapon, and it's kind of an oddball choice, but as a secondary weapon or an offhand weapon, this can be very, very fun to play with on a strength-based build. All right, next up is the Bastard Sword, the final martial weapon on the list. This is a D8 damage die, one-handed sword, and that makes it a highest just straight one-handed damage weapon we've talked about so far, which is solid. The only trait it has is the two-handed D12 trait, meaning it's very easy to go between one hand and two hands using this weapon. In fact, it almost matches a greatsword, except for the greatsword gets the versatile P, giving you piercing as an option. Other than that, the Bastard Sword's just clearly better, because you can use it in either one or two hands as you see fit. And being able to swap between that, being able to swap between, say, sword and board, and hitting hard with two hands, I think that's worth losing the versatile P at least most of the time. The sword crit specialization is solid. The creature is off guard until the start of your next turn. Yes, there are a ton of ways to make creatures off guard, which is why it's not like the strongest crit specialization, but there is no save against it. So a lot of these we've seen, like knocking prone and all that, they have saves against that effect. Not this time. Nope, they are just off guard. And the whole team's going to be able to take advantage. Everybody has a higher hit and crit chance now because you put the creature off guard. So all those follow-up attacks from your allies, they're just going to come in hot. It's not as strong as some of the other crit specializations, but it is a solid workhorse crit specialization. I like the simple versatility of the playstyle this offers while also keeping damage up. This is also just kind of a good weapon to give a new player where they can use it effectively and not have to stress over the weapon traits. Like some of them, you really need to know what you're doing. All right, we're going to look at two advanced weapons real quick, just because I felt like putting them in here because I don't know that people talk about advanced weapons a lot, and there's not a lot of builds that are designed for them, but if you have one, these can be kind of fun. So the Falcata. This is a one-handed D8 sword, so solid damage just like we talked about. It has the fatal D12 trait though, which again means that crits with this weapon convert even the one-handed weapon damage die into D12s and adding that D12 at the end. This is a strength dual wielder's dream weapon. You hold on to 2 of these, and when you crit, you do crazy, crazy damage. And again, it's a sword, so if you do crit and somehow they survive all that damage, they're now off guard to all of your allies. If you do want to dive into advanced weapons, this is something I highly recommend, especially if you're only allowed common weapons, as a lot of the advanced weapons are uncommon, even if it's just because they have relations to certain ancestries. And here's our last one of the video, certainly not the most or least important, but a fun one, the Nodachi. Once again, we have a sword. I know there's a lot of swords, but there's just a lot of advanced swords. I don't know what that's about. Just a lot of swords in general, actually. This is a two-handed and still has a D8. And yes, that sounds low. Give me a second. This has amazing traits. It starts with Fatal D12, so already, every time we crit, getting all those D12s in there. Fantastic, making up for that low damage die. It tacks on Reach, which is why the D8 doesn't feel bad, because again, that Reach really means D10 is usually your max. And finally, it has the Brace trait. Now, this is something that doesn't pop up. I didn't even talk about it in my video because it's so rare. It means that if you take 2 actions to ready an action to strike, that strike will get a +2 precision bonus damage per weapon damage dice if you hit with the strike. So you're adding on damage on top of what may or may not be a crit to add even more damage, but even the base damage, precision damage you're doing is making up for some of that low damage die. And again, sword, so off guard on a crit. A sword with reach, with especially high crit, readied for extra damage. It just comes together into this nice, fun package that might entice you to try a slightly different playstyle. And there we have it, my favorite non-finesse melee weapons. Do you have a favorite strength-based weapon? Maybe you think that this list is just awful and I have no idea what I'm talking about. I agree. Let me know in the comments. For now, I'm going to look over ranged weapons and finesse weapons and decide what I think of those. And as always, adventure on.